Portland never stopped raining. Not the kind of downpour that washed everything away, but a persistent drizzle, as if the sky were quietly whispering a wordless, sorrowful song. Hazel Quinn stepped out of her art studio, her thin coat soaked through, brown hair clinging messily to her forehead. She pulled up her hood, but it was useless. The rain still crept in, cold and piercing, like a reminder that her heart had frozen long ago. Today felt longer than usual. A picky client had complained that her illustration lacked soul, and a colleague had accidentally brought up the past. The day her fiancé disappeared with another woman just weeks before the wedding. Hazel didn't answer. She just smiled, that practiced, lifeless smile she'd perfected in the mirror 100 times. But inside, her chest felt crushed. She locked the studio door behind her and stepped into the street, hoping the rain might wash away the scattered pieces of her memory. Portland's streets glimmered under neon lights, with small cafes casting a soft, blurry glow. Hazel passed by Laurelhurst Park, where ancient oak trees stood quietly, their leaves rustling in the breeze. She was about to turn toward home when a faint whimper made her stop, a tiny, weak sound, nearly drowned out by the rain. She looked down and her heart skipped a beat. A small golden dog lay curled up by the curb, drenched and shivering. Blood seeped from its hind leg, mixing with the rainwater puddles. Its eyes met hers, shiny, not from pain, but from a silent plea. Hazel didn't think. She knelt down, not caring that her jeans were soaking or that her canvas shoes were drenched. "Don't be scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're going to be okay." She took off her coat and gently wrapped it around the dog, trying to keep it warm. Her mind raced, searching for the nearest animal clinic. She vaguely remembered one nearby, a few blocks away. But it was raining hard, and this dog couldn't wait. Hazel scooped it up like a child and walked quickly into the rain. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her, hurried and heavy. A deep voice cut through the downpour. "Wait, that's my dog!" Hazel turned, startled. A tall man in a dark blue coat, soaked from head to toe, was running toward her. His black hair was tousled, a few strands stuck to his forehead, and his eyes, oh, those eyes, deep and frantic, like his entire world was in her arms. Hazel stood frozen, unsure of what to say. The man stopped in front of her, panting, eyes locked on the dog. "Finn," he whispered, voice cracking. "He ran into the street. I couldn't catch him." Hazel frowned, trying to stay calm. "He's hurt. We need to get him to a vet. Now." The man nodded without hesitation. He pulled a small umbrella from his coat pocket, opened it, and held it over her and the dog. "I know a place. Follow me." They walked, almost ran, through rain-slicked streets. The umbrella was too small for both of them, and Hazel noticed the man's left shoulder was already soaked. He was tilting the umbrella toward her, taking the rain himself. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. There was something about him, the silence, the focus, the raw concern in the way he looked at the dog, that made her feel safe, even if just for a moment. The clinic appeared at the end of the block, warm yellow light spilling from its windows. The sign read, "Blake Veterinary Clinic." The man pushed the door open and motioned for Hazel to enter. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with aged wood. A young woman, possibly an assistant, sprang up from behind the front desk. "Dr. Blake, what happened?" "Finn was hit by a car," he replied, voice calm but urgent. "Prep the surgical room, Sarah." Hazel laid the dog gently on the exam table, her hands trembling. The man, Dr. Blake, she assumed, took off his coat, revealing a light blue shirt, half soaked. He examined Finn with quick but gentle movements, as if the dog were a part of him. Hazel stepped back, suddenly feeling like an intruder. She wanted to leave, but her feet didn't move. Something held her there. Maybe Finn's eyes, maybe his. "Is Finn going to be okay?" she asked, voice so small she wasn't sure he'd hear. He looked up, and for the first time their eyes truly met. His were deep brown, like a forest after rain. There was a quiet sadness in them, but also a tenderness she hadn't expected. "I'll do everything I can," he said firmly. "Thank you for saving him." Hazel nodded, feeling her cheeks warm despite the cold room. I just did what anyone would do." He smiled, just barely, but it was enough to make her heart stutter. Not everyone stops in the rain for a stray dog. Hazel didn't know how to respond. She looked down at her hands, still stained with a mix of blood and rainwater. Sarah, the assistant, returned carrying a tray of tools. "Would you like to wait?" she asked Hazel. "There's a coffee machine out front." "No, Hazel shook her head, ready to leave. The space felt too warm, too intimate. It made her want to run. But then Rowan called after her. "Wait." He grabbed a clean towel from a nearby shelf and handed it to her. "You're soaked. At least dry off before you go." Hazel hesitated, then took the towel. It was warm, lightly scented with soap. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm Rowan," he said, as naturally as if they were simply meeting by chance. "Rowan Blake." "Hazel," she replied, and for one brief moment it felt like the rain outside had stopped. Only their eyes remained, wet, silent, like two souls lost in the storm, finally finding each other. Rowan gestured toward a wooden chair near the reception. "You're shivering. Sit down for a bit. You can't go out in weather like this." Hazel meant to say no, but the chill in her bones made her nod. Reluctantly, she sat down, clutching the towel, unaware that this moment would change everything. Rowan turned back to Finn, but even just a fleeting glance from him stayed in her mind, like a flicker of warmth in the rain. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story's just beginning. Hazel sat on the wooden chair in the clinic, the terry cloth towel Rowan had given her still wrapped around her shoulders. The rain continued falling beyond the glass, a fine drizzle like silver threads connecting the sky to the ground. Inside, the golden light from wall sconces spilled across old wooden shelves, where a few children's books lay scattered among jars of veterinary medicine. She rubbed her hands together, trying to warm up. But the cold wasn't just from the rain. It came from her heart, a place that had stayed frozen for far too long. She didn't know why she'd agreed to stay. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was Rowan's eyes, deep and gentle, as if he understood her better than she was ready to admit. Hazel glanced over at him as he stood behind the counter, checking instruments before taking Finn into surgery. He'd removed his wet coat, revealing a light blue shirt, slightly wrinkled, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Every gesture he made radiated focus, but not detachment, as if he were tending to his whole world, not just the small dog lying there. "Thank you," Rowan said, his deep voice breaking the quiet. He looked up, and their eyes met once again. "If it weren't for you, Finn might not have made it." Hazel shrugged, trying to maintain her indifference. "I just happened to walk by." She glanced toward the door, where the rain still fell steadily, as if she were longing to escape. Staying here in this room, with this stranger, made her uneasy. Not because of him, but because of herself, because of the wounds inside her that still hadn't stopped bleeding. Rowan seemed to notice her hesitation. He walked over to the rack, pulled down another towel, then paused, looking at her with quiet perceptiveness. "You're shivering," he said, not judgmentally, just stating a fact. "Just stay a little while. Weather like this, it's not pleasant out there." Hazel nodded, even though her heart still wanted to say no. She looked down at her soaked canvas shoes, feeling like a lost child with no idea what to do next. Rowan returned to the counter, pulled a ceramic mug from a small cupboard. "Coffee?" he offered, lifting an old coffee pot. "No, thank you," Hazel replied softly. She looked again at her drenched shoes, still feeling like a kid who didn't belong. Rowan didn't push. He poured himself a cup, steam rising from it, then sat in the chair across from her, far enough not to invade her space. "Finn's a special dog," he began gently, like telling a story. "He likes to run off, but he's never gone this far. He probably saw the rain, got too excited, and forgot his way back." Hazel couldn't help but smile just for a second. He looked happy even while he was hurt. "Exactly," Rowan nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Dogs don't know how to hide how they feel. That's why I like working with them. They're more honest than people." His words made Hazel pause. She looked at him, searching for sarcasm, but saw only sincerity. She lowered her gaze, rubbing her hands against the towel, unsure how to respond. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt like a rest between two notes in a song, a quiet place where they could both catch their breath. Rowan took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down, his eyes drifting across the room. "Do you work nearby?" he asked in a conversational but unforced tone. "I saw you coming from the park, near the art district." Hazel nodded, keeping her distance. "I'm an illustrator. My studio's a few blocks from here." "An illustrator," Rowan repeated like the word itself held something special. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with quiet curiosity. "What kind of art? Abstract? Landscapes? Or—" "Mostly children's books," Hazel answered flatly. She didn't want to elaborate, didn't want to open a door that might lead to deeper questions. But Rowan didn't press. Instead, he stood, walked to the bookshelf, and picked out a slim book with a blue cover, a dancing bunny under the moonlight. "You did this one, didn't you?" he asked, holding up the book. "The Bunny and the Dreaming Hill?" Hazel blinked, surprised. She recognized it instantly, a project she'd done 2 years ago, before everything in her life fell apart. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice slightly raised in surprise. Rowan smiled, this time a real smile, one that lit up his whole face. "My niece is obsessed with this book. I read it to her every weekend. There's one illustration where the bunny sits on the hill, staring at a starry sky. I always thought whoever drew that must really love the little things in life." Hazel felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to someone talking about her work like that, as if they truly saw her through her brushstrokes. I, I was just doing the job," she said, trying to sound indifferent. But inside, a small spark flickered, the feeling of being seen, even for a moment. Rowan set the book down, his eyes kind but never intrusive. "You've got talent. Not everyone can draw something that makes people smile." Hazel didn't respond, but she felt the warmth of his words like a small fire in the cold rain. She looked toward the window, where the rain had lightened into a fine mist. "I should go," she said, rising to her feet and returning the towel. "Thank you, for the coffee and for everything." Rowan stood, nodding. "Thank you for helping Finn." He walked her to the door, and as she stepped outside, he called out after her, "Hazel, if you want to know how Finn's doing, feel free to stop by anytime." She turned, surprised he'd remembered her name. "I'll think about it," she said, then stepped back into the rain. She pulled her hood up, but this time she didn't feel as alone. Rowan's face, the book, his eyes, deep like a quiet promise, lingered in her mind. Back inside, Rowan stood by the door, watching her disappear into the mist. He picked up the towel she'd left behind, still holding the faint scent of rain and something softer. He smiled gently, then turned back to Finn, but his heart, for the first time in years, beat a little differently. This morning in Portland, it wasn't raining, but the sky remained gray, as if hesitating between tears and a smile. Hazel Quinn walked down the street leading to Blake Veterinary Clinic, a rolled-up painting in her hand. She wore a long cream sweater, and her old leather boots scuffed softly across the sidewalk, scattered with oak leaves. Her heart beat faster than usual, not from worry but from a strange feeling, like stepping into an unfinished painting where the colors hadn't yet settled. Finn, the golden-furred dog, had recovered. Rowan had called her 3 days ago, his warm voice over the phone saying, "He's walking again. If you'd like, come see him." Hazel hadn't answered right away. She simply said, "I'll think about it," then hung up. But deep down, she knew she would come. Not just because of Finn. There was something about Rowan, his deep eyes, his fleeting smile, the way he talked about small things, that pulled her back, if only to see if that feeling was real. She stopped in front of the clinic and took a deep breath. The doorbell chimed as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mingled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Sarah, the assistant, was labeling a bottle of medication. She looked up and smiled. "Hazel, Finn's going to be so happy. He's in the back with Dr. Blake." Hazel nodded, feeling her cheeks warm. She walked down the short hallway, catching the soft sounds of whining and dog paws scratching the floor. As she reached the back room, Rowan was kneeling beside Finn, gently examining the dog's hind leg. Finn wagged his tail, eyes bright, as if he'd never been hurt. Rowan looked up, and when their eyes met, a soft smile appeared on his face. "Hazel," he said, standing and brushing his hands on his white lab coat. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I brought this," Hazel replied, holding up the rolled painting, her voice a little hesitant. "For Finn, just a small gift." Rowan raised an eyebrow, curious. He motioned her inside, and they sat at a small table in the corner where a few notebooks lay scattered. Hazel unrolled the painting and laid it flat. It was a watercolor illustration, Finn lying on a grassy hill surrounded by wildflowers, sunlight glinting off his golden fur. The sky in the painting was a deep, cloudless blue, so unlike the real Portland outside. Rowan leaned in, examining each detail. He didn't speak immediately, just ran his fingers lightly along the edge of the paper, as if touching something precious. "You made this for Finn?" he asked softly, almost in a whisper. Hazel shrugged, trying to stay indifferent. "I thought he deserved it, after everything he's been through." Rowan looked at her, his gaze deep, as though trying to read a story she hadn't yet told. "You paint love," he said slowly, "even though your eyes are so sad." The words struck Hazel like a tiny needle to the heart. She wanted to protest, to say he didn't know anything about her, but his eyes held no judgment, no excessive curiosity, just that same way he looked at Finn, or at the children's book the other day. Hazel felt the corners of her mouth lift, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Not the practiced smile she rehearsed in the mirror, but a small, genuine one. "Thank you," she said, her voice light as the breeze. "I'm not used to compliments." Rowan smiled back, a smile that seemed to brighten the whole room. "It's not a compliment. I'm just saying what I see." They sat there in the quiet hum of the back room, surrounded by Finn's occasional whimpers and the distant drip of the coffee machine. Hazel talked about the painting, how she'd imagined Finn running across a hill that didn't exist. Rowan listened without interrupting, without prying into her past, without probing the scars she kept hidden. He only nodded, sometimes asking a gentle question. "Do you prefer watercolor over acrylic?" Or, "Is that hill a real place?" Innocent questions, but enough to make her feel like she didn't need to be on guard. "You don't ask a lot of questions," Hazel said suddenly, once her story about the painting came to a close. She tilted her head and looked at him. "Most people want to know why I am the way I am." Rowan shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not great at asking, and I figure if you want to tell me, you will." Hazel looked down at her hands, still stained faintly with watercolor. His words were simple, but they felt like a breeze passing through the wall she'd built around her heart. She wasn't used to someone who didn't try to fix her, who didn't dig through her past out of curiosity. Rowan was just there, quiet, steady, like a street lamp in the rain, asking for nothing except the chance to shine. Finn, sensing the moment, trotted over and nudged his head against Hazel's leg. She bent down and stroked his head, smiling again, this time wider, more naturally. Rowan watched her, his eyes soft, as if witnessing something miraculous. "You should stop by more often," he said, half joking, half serious. "Finn would miss you, and I might learn how to make better coffee." Hazel shook her head, but her smile lingered. "I'll think about it." When she left the clinic, the painting was hung on the wall, right beside the bookshelf. The Portland sky was still gray, but Hazel felt a sliver of sunshine inside. She walked without pulling her hood up, letting the soft drizzle kiss her face. And from that day on, she started stopping by the clinic. Not every day, but often enough for Finn to wag his tail when he saw her, and often enough for Rowan's eyes to become a familiar part of her quiet gray days. This afternoon in Portland was damp, not from rain, but from the heavy humidity that lingered in the air, as if the city were sighing after a storm. Hazel Quinn stepped into a small coffee shop on Hawthorne Street, where amber lights glowed softly behind fogged-up windows. She wore an olive green trench coat, her hair loosely tied back, a few strands falling across her forehead. In her bag, she carried a sketchbook, not to draw, but as a shield, something to retreat into if things became too real. Rowan had invited her for coffee that morning when she stopped by the clinic to check on Finn. He'd said it awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck like a schoolboy asking someone out for the first time. "There's a place nearby. Great coffee. If you're free this afternoon?" Hazel had nodded before she could even think it through. And now, here she was, heart beating faster than usual, unsure of what exactly she was waiting for. The coffee shop was called the Rusty Mug, a cozy little spot with old wooden tables and bookshelves packed with faded romance novels. Rowan had arrived first, seated by the window, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He wore a gray sweater, sleeves pushed up slightly to reveal his lean wrists. When Hazel walked in, he looked up, and his smile, gentle, familiar, made her feel like she'd found shelter from the storm. "Hazel," he said, standing to pull out her chair, "I was afraid you might change your mind." "This close?" "That would have been hard," she replied, taking the seat, trying to sound casual. But her lips curled into a smile, and Rowan noticed. It was small, but it lit up her whole face. The server brought Hazel a latte, the foam shaped like a leaf. They sat together amid the low hum of conversations and soft jazz playing in the background, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, Finn, how Portland always made people want to stay inside. But then, as if the humidity had seeped into their bones, the conversation shifted, deeper, more real. "Have you ever thought about leaving Portland?" Rowan asked, stirring his coffee, his eyes drifting toward the window, where the street shimmered under the glow of the lights. Hazel took a sip of her latte, the gentle bitterness resting on her tongue. "I have. After that." She paused, fingers tightening around the handle of her cup. "I thought if I went somewhere where no one knew me, maybe I'd forget. But I stayed. I don't even know why." Rowan nodded, not asking what that was. He just looked at her, eyes deep and still, as if he understood without needing the details. "I wanted to leave too," he said, his voice low. "After the divorce, I thought if I moved to a new city, I wouldn't have to see the same places, relive the same memories. But then, Finn kept me here, the clinic, and Portland, this damn rain." Hazel smiled, this time more openly. "The rain kept you?" "Maybe," Rowan replied with a soft chuckle. "Or maybe I was just too lazy to pack." They both laughed, a light breeze of a moment, but the silence that followed returned heavier. Hazel looked down at her latte, where the leaf had started to dissolve. She didn't know why, but the words came out slowly, like she was painting with her voice. "He, the man I once loved, he left right before the wedding, for someone else? I thought I was the kind of person people leave." She spoke calmly without bitterness or tears, but each word cut like a tiny blade. She waited for Rowan to ask. The usual questions. Why did he do that? What did you do? Are you okay now? But he didn't. He simply leaned forward, hands clasped on the table, his gaze gentle but never pitying. "And I," Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "thought I didn't deserve to be loved." He looked out the window as if watching memories drift by. "My ex-wife, she said I was boring, too attached to the clinic, to the dogs. She wanted someone different, and she found him. I don't blame her, but I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't enough." Hazel felt her chest tighten, not from his story, but from the way he told it. There was no anger, no bitterness, just quiet acceptance, like someone who had learned to live with his scar. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached out and lightly touched the rim of his coffee cup, a small, almost unconscious gesture. "You're not boring," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "You saved Finn. You make your niece laugh with books. You make people feel seen." Rowan turned back to her, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a flicker of something there, not surprise but quiet gratitude. "And you," he said, "are not someone who should have been left. Not ever." They sat there in a space between spoken apologies and silent scars. The coffee cooled, but the air between them stayed warm, like a small fire burning in the rain. Hazel felt something inside her, something that had been frozen for so long, begin to thaw. Not because Rowan promised anything, but because he simply listened, never asking her to be anyone other than herself. When they left the cafe, a light drizzle had begun to fall. Rowan lifted his small umbrella and tilted it toward Hazel, just like the day they met. She stepped closer to him, their shoulders touching, and this time she didn't pull up her hood. The rain fell, but it no longer felt cold. Today in Portland, the rain poured down as if the sky had held back its tears for too long and was now letting them all fall at once. The streets shimmered beneath dim lights, water rushing along the sidewalks, carrying oak leaves and scraps of paper. Hazel Quinn ran through the storm, her small black umbrella failing to shield her, her olive coat soaked through, hair plastered to her cheeks. She didn't care. Finn, the golden retriever who had connected her to Rowan, was being adopted today, and she wanted to be there, even if it was just to say goodbye. The Blake Veterinary Clinic appeared at the end of the street, its warm yellow light glowing through the window like a lighthouse in a storm. Hazel had stopped by frequently over the past few weeks, bringing sketches, small stories, and a piece of her heart she hadn't dared to acknowledge. Rowan was always there, with his gentle smile and deep, unreadable eyes, never asking her to open up more than she was ready to. But today felt different, like the rain was pulling her into a painting she hadn't yet finished. She pushed open the door, the bell chiming, but the clinic was quiet. Sarah, the assistant, stood behind the counter and smiled. Hazel, Finn was just adopted. A wonderful family with 2 little kids. Rowan's walking them out the back. Hazel nodded, her heart pounding faster. She didn't know why she had run here, why Finn leaving made her feel so unsettled. She moved through the hallway toward the back door that led to the alley behind the clinic. Rain pounded the metal roof, creating a wild, chaotic symphony. She opened the door, and just then, Rowan stepped in from the alley, his white coat soaked, dark hair tousled and dripping. Hazel, he called, his voice a mix of surprise and joy. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, trying to see through the rain. You came for Finn? She nodded, though the words stuck in her throat. The rain fell between them like a curtain, blurring the space that remained. Rowan stepped closer, and Hazel's umbrella slipped from her hand, rolling away in the wind. They stood there soaked to the bone, saying nothing, his eyes locked on hers, deep, unwavering, as if he were looking into her soul, not to search but to hold. Finn's going to be okay, Rowan said, his voice low, nearly drowned by the storm. You saved him. You know that, right? Hazel nodded, but her vision blurred. Whether from the rain or something deeper, she couldn't tell. Her chest felt heavy, not because of Finn, but because of herself, because of everything she'd locked away since being left behind. Rowan stood before her, so real, so close. It scared her. She feared that if she let herself feel it, she might break again. I don't think I'm ready, she whispered, her voice trembling, nearly lost in the rain. She didn't clarify. Ready for what? Love? Hope? Trusting again? But Rowan understood. He always did, even without her explaining. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. Rain fell on his shoulders into his hair, but he didn't care. He looked at her with an intensity that was tender, as if he were making a promise without words. And then softly, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was gentle, warm, like a quiet assurance that everything would be okay. Rain poured over them, cold and relentless, but that moment burned, like a small flame in a storm. Hazel stood still, heart pounding, but she didn't pull away. She felt his warmth, through his lips, his closeness, the way he still held her gaze even after they parted. Rowan leaned back just enough to look into her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, he said, his voice low and steady, like a silent vow. Hazel didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. The rain kept falling, but it no longer felt like the sky weeping. It was a song, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come out of the storms. She looked at Rowan, soaked, his hair clinging to his forehead. But his eyes held firm. He was still there, just like the street lamp she'd once imagined him to be, shining even in the rain. You're freezing, Rowan said, picking up the fallen umbrella. Though it was useless now, he held it over her anyway, tilting it just like the first day they met. Come inside, Hazel. I'll make us some coffee. She nodded, not for the coffee, but because she wanted to stay. Not just in the clinic, but in this moment, with him. They walked back inside, leaving the storm behind, but the kiss and Rowan's quiet promise stayed with her, like the first brushstroke on a brand new canvas. As they entered, Sarah looked up and smiled knowingly. You two look like you just swam across the Willamette, she joked, handing each of them a towel. Hazel took it, drying her hair, and when she looked at Rowan, he was already looking at her, eyes soft but fierce, as if that kiss had only been the beginning. She sat down, hands wrapped around the hot mug of coffee Rowan had made, letting the warmth seep through her fingers. Outside, the rain still howled, but in this room, with Rowan by her side, she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't quite ready yet, but for the first time in a long while, she thought, maybe she could try. This morning, Portland was quiet. The rain had dwindled to a drizzle, like tears that had finally run dry. Hazel Quinn sat in her small apartment, the gray light from the window spilling across her drawing table, where a blank sheet of paper rested, untouched. She wore an oversized sweater, her hair tied up high, but her eyes, the same eyes that used to light up when drawing Finn, now looked tired, as if they were trying to escape from herself. Rowan's kiss in the rain 2 weeks ago still lingered. Not on her lips, but in her heart, like a melody she didn't dare hum again. She had been avoiding him. Not out of anger, and not because she didn't feel the warmth of his lips, but because she was scared. Scared that if she let herself fall, she would shatter again, the way she had when the man she once loved left her without a word. Every time she thought about stopping by the clinic, her chest tightened. She kept telling herself, I'm not ready. I don't know how to love someone again. But each night when she closed her eyes, she saw Rowan's gaze, deep, tender, and his quiet promise, I'm not going anywhere. Hazel stood and walked to the bookshelf, where a cup of cocoa had gone cold by the window. Rowan had left it for her 3 days ago, when she had accidentally walked past the clinic and Sarah called her in. She was about to decline, but Sarah winked and handed her a paper cup with a messy note scribbled on it. Drink this. It's cold out. Hazel recognized Rowan's handwriting. She took the cup home, not to drink, but because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It stood there still, like a quiet reminder that he was still thinking of her. She returned to the drawing table, trying to start something new, but her hands trembled. She remembered the last thing she drew, the watercolor of Finn, and the way Rowan had looked at it, as if he saw her whole world inside those colors. She wanted to paint again, to feel that moment return, but fear kept her still. If I open up, she whispered to herself, what then? Meanwhile, at Blake Veterinary Clinic, Rowan stood behind the counter, reviewing a file for a new kitten. He wore his white coat, but his eyes lacked the focus they usually held. Sarah, organizing medication on a nearby shelf, glanced at him and smiled. She'll come back, she said, half teasing, half hopeful. Rowan shrugged, but the corners of his mouth curved faintly. I'm not in a rush, he replied, though inside he wasn't so sure. That kiss, that moment he couldn't hold back, had changed everything. He could feel Hazel's hesitation, not because she didn't feel something, but because she was afraid. He understood. He had been afraid once too, after his wife left, leaving only questions with no answers. But with Hazel, he didn't want to push, didn't want to ask. He just wanted her to know he was here, no matter how far she ran. Yesterday, he'd left a small gift at the door of Hazel's studio, a leather-bound sketchbook, the kind he'd seen her use. He didn't sign his name, only tucked in a small note that read, "For new beginnings." He didn't know if she'd received it, but he hoped, even just a little, that she would understand. Hazel had found it that morning when she unlocked the studio. She picked it up, ran her fingers over the smooth cover, and felt the warmth behind Rowan's quiet gesture. She wanted to call him, to say something, anything, but her phone remained silent on the table. Instead, she opened the sketchbook, and a folded slip of paper fell out. She read it, her heart beating faster. He's not giving up, she thought, and for the first time, she didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. That afternoon, the rain returned, not pouring, but enough to cover Portland in a soft veil of mist. Hazel stood before the mirror, staring into her own eyes. "You can't keep hiding forever," she said aloud, her voice shaking. She pulled a sketch from the drawer, a portrait of Rowan, unfinished, only faint pencil strokes. She had drawn it the night before when she couldn't sleep, but hadn't dared add color. She folded the paper, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped outside, without an umbrella. She didn't walk straight to the clinic. She wandered through Laurelhurst Park, where she had first seen Finn, letting the rain soak her coat. She thought about Rowan, about how he never asked her why, never blamed her for disappearing. She thought about the gifts he left, the cocoa, the sketchbook, and yesterday, the clumsy but heartfelt portrait of her he'd sent through Sarah. It wasn't the work of an artist, but of a man trying to say, "I see you." Hazel stopped outside the clinic, her heart pounding. She pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly. Rowan was behind the counter. He looked up, and his eyes lit up, though he tried to hide it. "Hazel," he said, his voice low, like her name was a quiet prayer. Hazel started, but her words caught in her throat. She pulled the folded sketch from her pocket, placed it gently on the counter, her hands trembling. "I drew this. For you." Rowan opened the sketch, his eyes scanning the soft lines. It was him, not perfect, not complete, but seen through her eyes. He smiled, not a bright grin, but something quieter, more grateful. "Thank you," he said, voice husky. "It's beautiful." Hazel looked at him, wanting to say she was scared, that she didn't know if she could love again, but instead she just nodded. When he handed her a cup of hot tea, she accepted it and sat down in the familiar chair. They didn't say much after that, but the silence wasn't heavy. It felt like the rain outside, gentle, patient, waiting. When she left, Rowan watched her go, the sketch still in his hand. He didn't call her back, didn't ask why she'd stayed away, but inside he knew she had returned, if only one small step, and he would wait as he had promised, not going anywhere. Today, Portland felt gentler. The rain had faded into sparkling drops clinging to oak leaves, as if the sky had grown tired of crying. Hazel Quinn sat in her small apartment, silvery light from the window falling across her desk, where an unfinished painting rested quietly. She wore a thin gray sweater, her hair down, and for the first time in 2 years, she held a brush not for work, but for herself. The watercolor strokes spread across the paper, not precise, not perfect, but full of emotion. A portrait of Rowan Blake, the man who had walked into her life like a sudden rainstorm. 2 years ago, after her fiancé left her days before their wedding, Hazel stopped painting for herself. Every piece she completed since then was a commission, cold, lifeless. But ever since she brought that sketch to Rowan last week, something inside her had awakened. She had begun drawing again. At first, hesitantly, then gradually, like a river remembering its course, she painted him. Not some ideal version of Rowan, but her version, hair tousled in the rain, eyes full of depth, and a sad smile that felt like a promise. This painting was unlike anything she'd ever created. It was raw, with shades of blue and gray melting together, evoking Portland's rainy days. Rowan stood under a tree in the portrait, his white coat slightly rumpled, hands in his pockets, looking into the distance. Hazel didn't know why she painted him that way, but every brushstroke felt like a confession she wasn't ready to speak aloud. She was afraid, but she longed too, longed to feel alive again, to love again. A small community art show was being hosted at the gallery where Hazel worked, an event to showcase local artists. Her co-worker Mia had convinced her to submit a painting. "You need to show people the real Hazel, not the one who paints children's books," Mia had insisted, eyes firm. Hazel hesitated, but in the end she chose the portrait of Rowan. She hung it in the back corner of the gallery, unsigned, with only a small card below it. The Man in the Rain. The night of the show, the gallery buzzed with golden light, laughter, and the clink of wine glasses. Hazel stood near the drinks table, wearing a deep blue knit dress, her hair tied low, trying her best to blend in with the crowd. Her eyes drifted to her painting, her heart pounding. She hadn't told Rowan about the show, hadn't invited him, but part of her hoped he would come, the way he always appeared, quietly, at just the right moment. What she didn't know was that Sarah, the clinic assistant, had already told him. "Hazel's got a piece in the show," she'd said with a wink. "You should go, doctor." "Blake, I bet it's worth it." Rowan had smiled, but deep down he knew he would go. Not out of curiosity, but because he wanted to see Hazel. Not through the things he left behind, but through her world. When Rowan stepped into the gallery, Hazel didn't notice right away. He wore a dark blue coat, his hair damp with rain, as if Portland refused to let him arrive dry. He wandered through the exhibits, eyes scanning until they landed on the man in the rain. He stopped, frozen, as if time itself had paused. Hazel, watching from the drinks table, saw him. Her chest tightened. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her feet carried her forward, one slow step at a time, like in a dream. "Rowan," she called softly, almost lost in the murmur of the crowd. He turned, and his eyes, oh, those eyes, shimmered, not from the rain, but from something deeper. "Hazel," he said hoarsely, "this is me, isn't it?" She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know why I painted it. I just needed to." Rowan turned back to the painting, his fingers grazing the edge of the frame, not touching, like it was something fragile. "It's beautiful," he said, voice shaking. "Not because it's me, but because it's you. Everything you feel, it's here." Hazel felt her eyes sting. She hadn't expected him to understand. She hadn't expected him to see her in those hesitant strokes, but he did, just like he always had, through her sadness, through her fear, through the walls she tried to build. She wanted to say something, to explain, but the words dissolved. Instead, she stood there beside him, staring at the painting. Rowan turned to her, and a tear slid down his cheek. Not from the rain, but from within. Quiet, unhidden, as if the painting had unlocked a door inside him. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be a part of your world." Hazel's heart stirred, not from pain, but something gentler, like a petal touching water. She didn't cry, but she smiled, a small, honest smile, like the one she gave him back at the clinic. "I'm not sure I'm doing this right," she said, voice unsteady, "but I want to try." They stood there among the chatter of the crowd, beneath golden lights and the scent of oil paint. The rain had stopped outside, but Hazel felt it still falling inside her. Not as sorrow, but as something new, something cleansing. Rowan didn't take her hand. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. "I'm still here, just like I promised." And this time, she wanted to believe. When the exhibition ended, Hazel lingered near the painting for one last look before leaving. Rowan had already gone, but he left behind a small note on the table beside her wine glass. "You reminded me that a heart can beat again. See you at the clinic." Hazel picked it up and smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't just feel alive. She felt like she was truly living again. You're watching Soul Stories. This story is created exclusively for our channel. If you're still following along, leave a comment below to share your thoughts. We read and appreciate every single one. Your support helps us continue making original, heart-touching stories. Please don't forget to subscribe, and remember, Soul Stories is the only home for these true-to-heart tales. Thank you for being part of our family. Tonight, Portland wasn't raining, but the sky hung heavy with clouds, as if holding back a storm it wasn't ready to release. Hazel Quinn sat in her studio, the light from her desk lamp casting a glow over a new sketch. Just faint lines, undefined, incomplete. She wore a loose blue sweater, her hair tied loosely, but her mind was elsewhere. Since the art show last week, when Rowan looked at her painting and cried, something inside her had shifted. She no longer ran from him, but the fear was still there. Fear that if she let herself love, she might lose everything again. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It was Sarah, the assistant at Blake Veterinary Clinic. Her voice trembled through the speaker. "Hazel, he's hurt. Rowan, he's at the hospital. Can you come?" Hazel felt the blood drain from her face. "What happened?" she asked, gripping the phone. But Sarah only repeated, "Just come. Providence Hospital, emergency wing." The call ended, leaving Hazel in a breathless silence. She didn't think. She grabbed her coat and ran out the door. No umbrella, no care for the clouds looming above. Providence Hospital was lit bright with fluorescent lights, the sharp scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Hazel burst through the reception doors, breathless, her hair clinging to her damp face, half from sweat and half from a light drizzle. A nurse led her down a long hallway to the trauma care unit. Sarah was already there, eyes red, and pulled Hazel into a hug the moment she arrived. "A big dog panicked during an emergency," Sarah explained, her voice choked. "Rowan tried to hold him, but he got bitten, and he fell. His head hit the table. He lost a lot of blood, Hazel." Hazel didn't hear the rest. She pushed open the door, and what she saw made her heart stop. Rowan lay in the hospital bed, pale, with gauze wrapped around his head and left arm. His eyes were closed, an IV in his hand, the heart monitor beeping steadily. He looked fragile. No longer the man who tilted his umbrella toward her in the rain. No longer the deep eyes that had once seen through her sketches. Hazel stood frozen, a hand over her mouth, and then, like a dam breaking, she began to cry. She hadn't cried when her fiancé left her. She hadn't cried when she stopped painting or when she locked her heart away. But now, seeing Rowan lying there, the fear of losing him, sharp, real, and unbearable, poured into her chest. She stepped forward, trembling, and sat beside the bed, her fingers gently brushing his hand, cold beneath the bandages. "Rowan," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you have to wake up. You can't leave me." She bowed her head, tears landing on his hand, like the raindrops she once let fall onto her own cheeks in the park. She thought of the kiss, of the painting, of all the small gifts he'd left her. The cocoa, the sketchbook, the awkward portrait. She thought of what he once said, "I'm not going anywhere." And now she feared he might have lied. A faint squeeze around her fingers. Hazel looked up, her heart thudding. Rowan's eyes opened, tired but still bright, like streetlights in the rain. He looked at her, his lips curving into a faint, weak smile. "Hazel," he whispered, voice hoarse, "you cry, and you still look beautiful." She laughed through her tears, gripping his hand tighter. "Don't joke," she said, voice shaking. "You scared me to death." Rowan tried to shift, but pain made him wince. He looked at her, his gaze soft, without blame, without pressure. "I'm okay," he said slowly, "but if you leave again, I don't think my heart will be." The words pierced through the wall she had built around her heart like an arrow. Hazel bent down, resting her forehead against his hand, tears still falling. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, finally speaking the truth she had feared to admit. "I'm here, Rowan, with you." He smiled, weak but genuine, and held her hand tighter. They sat there surrounded by the rhythmic beep of machines and the sterile light of the hospital. No rain, no warm clinic, but this moment was everything. More real than any painting Hazel had ever created. Warmer than any cup of cocoa Rowan had ever offered. Outside the room, Sarah quietly stepped away, giving them space. A nurse entered to check the monitors, but Hazel didn't notice. She only saw Rowan, still whole in her eyes. Not a perfect man, but the man who had made her cry, made her afraid, and made her hope again. When the rain finally started to fall outside, Hazel didn't hear it. She only heard the beat of her own heart, matching his. She wiped her tears, smiled, and for the first time, she no longer felt like a shattered piece of the past. In Rowan's eyes, she was still whole, and now she was beginning to believe it, too. Autumn in Portland draped the city in a thin layer of mist. A gentle drizzle fell like strands of silver thread across the streets, glittering under the dim glow of street lamps. Hazel Quinn stood in front of a small house just 2 blocks from Blake Veterinary Clinic, her fingers curled around a cold metal key. Her heart beat gently, not with fear as before, but with something new, a quiet, steady rhythm of hope. The house had large windows, weathered red brick walls, and a tiny garden overgrown with weeds, where a few wild purple flowers swayed in the breeze. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't the perfect dream from a storybook, but it was hers. A new beginning, closer to Rowan and closer to herself. The decision to move hadn't come easily. After the night at the hospital, when Rowan woke, held her hand, and told her his heart couldn't take her leaving, Hazel realized she didn't want to run anymore. But love, or even just living near someone, still made her hesitate. She had spent countless nights in her old apartment, where the cold gray light was once her only companion. She painted, not just Rowan, but herself. She painted rainy days that no longer frightened her, and a version of Hazel who was slowly learning how to smile for real again. Each brushstroke felt like a step forward, as if she was repainting her own life. When she found this little house, modest but warm, she called Rowan. "I want to live closer to you," she said, her voice small but certain, like the first line of watercolor on a blank page. He only smiled on the other end of the line, his voice low and steady. "Then let's make it a home." Today was moving day. Hazel wore a long cream sweater, her hair tied up high, a few strands falling over her forehead. She carried a box filled with sketchbooks, watercolor jars, and small frame paintings. Rowan stood beside her, in a rumpled light blue shirt, holding an old wooden chair he'd pulled from a borrowed truck. He had fully recovered from the accident at the clinic, now left with only a small scar near his temple, like a quiet reminder of the days they had survived together. His eyes were brighter than ever, glowing like the warm light pouring from the house's windows. "You sure you want this chair?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, half teasing. "It looks like it could collapse any second." Hazel laughed, a natural, easy sound she once thought she'd lost forever. "It has character," she replied, setting the box on the porch and feeling the damp chill of the wood under her palms. "Like someone I know." Rowan chuckled, the sound rising warmly through the light drizzle, like morning tea shared between friends. He set the chair down, and they stood there, shoulder to shoulder, gazing at the small house. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but the golden light spilling from the windows into the mist felt like a quiet promise. They didn't shout their love. There were no rings, no vows under the moon. They simply lived close, cared deeply, day by day, moment by moment. Hazel painted, sometimes late into the night, pieces full of color and feeling. Rowan cared for dogs with the same gentleness he offered her. They found each other in the simple things: a cup of tea in the morning, an old movie on the couch, a brush of the hand as they passed in the kitchen. That afternoon, after the last box had been carried in, Hazel stood in the living room, arranging a wooden bookshelf Rowan had brought from the clinic. Her old children's illustration books now stood beside his veterinary texts, a quiet merging of lives. She smiled, thinking about the day they met, when he recognized her artwork from a book he read to his niece. Rowan disappeared for a moment, and Hazel assumed he was getting something from the truck. But then came a soft knock at the door, light, like a note in a rainy symphony. She opened it and found him standing there, holding a small wooden nameplate. It read, carved in neat script, "Hazel and Rowan, where old hearts learn to beat again." He scratched the back of his head, awkward, a rare expression for a man usually so composed. "I had this made," he said, a bit sheepish. "Thought it kind of fit us." Hazel took the plaque, running her fingers over the engraved letters. The wood felt smooth beneath her touch, warm in a quiet way. Her eyes burned, not from sadness, but from a soft kind of joy, like the golden light spilling from their windows. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like a broken piece of the past. She looked at Rowan, rumpled shirt, faded scar, so real she wanted to hold on forever. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then, without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight as if she feared he might vanish into the rain. He held her back gently, like someone cradling a fragile painting. His warmth soaked through her sweater, steady and sure. They stood there on the porch, raindrops falling on their shoulders, but neither of them cared. They hung the nameplate by the door, under the golden glow spilling from inside. Hazel didn't pull up her hood. She let the rain touch her face, cold but no longer lonely. She stood beside Rowan, their shoulders brushing, feeling his breath close to hers. They didn't need to say much. The silence between them spoke clearly, like a painting that didn't need a caption. That night, Hazel sat in her new living room, on the character chair Rowan had teased her about. She opened her sketchbook and began a new piece, a small painting of their house glowing in the rain. In the foreground, two soft silhouettes stood beneath the drizzle, hands intertwined. She didn't need the painting to be perfect. She didn't care if it pleased anyone but herself. She just needed it to be real, like she and Rowan were. Not because they were flawless, but because they were choosing to heal together, one day at a time. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside that house, Hazel felt a warmth deeper than any fire. She looked out toward the door, where the wooden nameplate quietly stood, and she smiled. This was home, not just hers, but theirs. A year had passed, and Portland was still Portland. Mist veiled the streets, and the ever-falling drizzle glittered like silver threads under neon lights. Hazel Quinn strolled through the Alberta Street Art Market, her hand clasped tightly in Rowan Blake's. A small black umbrella tilted protectively toward her. She wore a moss-green coat, hair down with a few strands damp against her cheek. Rowan, in a soft gray sweater, bore a faint scar near his temple now faded to nothing but a whisper of memory. But his smile, warm and familiar, shone brighter than any street lamp. They weren't the perfect couple from a romance novel, but their eyes, oh, their eyes were full of love, like two lost souls who had found each other after the storm. The market bustled with life. Booths filled with paintings, pottery, and handmade jewelry lined the sidewalks beneath makeshift awnings. Street music mixed with the patter of rain, creating a Portland symphony, imperfect, alive, and beautiful. Hazel paused at a booth displaying a painting of rain falling over a wildflower field. Not melancholy, but like a quiet hello from spring. She smiled, remembering the first painting she'd made for Rowan, the one that brought him to tears at the exhibition. She was no longer the Hazel from 2 years ago, the woman who locked her heart away in fear of being left. She still had hard days, still faced shadows of the past, but now she didn't face them alone. Rowan stood just behind her, hands in his pockets, his gaze soft. "Thinking about buying that one?" he teased. "Or planning to paint a better version?" Hazel turned, raising an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge?" She grinned and he laughed with her, the sound mingling with the soft rain. They continued walking hand in hand past the colorful stalls. People glanced at them, not flashy, not loud, but something about them was genuine, like a pair who had walked through the storm and found light on the other side. They stopped at a corner where a street violinist played a tender, hopeful melody, a reminder that even low notes can make a song. Hazel leaned into Rowan's shoulder, feeling his warmth through the knit of his sweater. She thought of their journey, of that first glance in the rain, the kiss during the storm, the little house with golden light, and the nameplate that read Hazel and Rowan, where old hearts learned to beat again. They didn't rush. They didn't try to be perfect. They simply chose to show up for each other, day by day, with healing made from small moments. A painting, a cup of cocoa, a tilted umbrella. "Rowan," Hazel said softly, her voice nearly lost in the violin song, "I don't know if I'm fully healed, but I do know that with you, I'm no longer afraid." He turned toward her, his eyes lighting up, like the first street lamp she ever saw in him. "Hazel," he said gently, "I can't promise you the whole world, but I promise I'll be here, rain or shine." She smiled, tears sparkling at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but because she believed him. She squeezed his hand tighter, and they stood there under their small umbrella in the middle of the art market. The rain kept falling, but it wasn't the enemy anymore. It was a friend, a quiet witness to their story. Not perfect, but true in every drop. 3 months later, Portland greeted a rare, clear day. The sky, a soft watercolor blue, looked like something Hazel herself had painted. In the garden behind their golden light home, a small wedding unfolded. Not grand, not overdone. Just Hazel and Rowan, surrounded by the people who knew them best. Sarah, the clinic assistant, wore a floral dress and darted about, gleefully self-appointed as the event coordinator. Mia, Hazel's co-worker, stood by an easel, sketching the ceremony as a surprise gift. Rowan's 6-year-old niece, Lily, tossed petals across the garden, giggling as they stuck in Hazel's hair. Hazel stood under a canopy of white linen, wearing a simple cream dress. No train, no veil. Her hair was down, dotted with wildflowers, and her eyes, once full of fear, now shimmered with light of their own. Rowan stood across from her in a deep blue suit, tieless, his shirt slightly wrinkled in that charming, effortless way. He looked at her with eyes wide open, joy and emotion unhidden. In his hand, a thin silver ring engraved with the letters H and R, not flashy, but meaningful enough to say everything. They hadn't hired a minister. Instead, an old friend of Rowan's, a retired vet, officiated. He read a brief passage about love. Not the cinematic kind, but the real kind. Love between hearts that had once been broken, once afraid, and had chosen to stay for one another. Hazel held Rowan's hand, feeling the warmth of it, and when asked if she would be his wife, she didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, voice strong, like she'd waited her whole life to say it. Rowan grinned, his smile lighting up the whole garden. I do too, he said. Everyone laughed, even Lily, who didn't quite understand why. He slipped the ring on her finger, and she did the same, the silver catching the sunlight. They didn't rush into a kiss. They just looked at each other, and their eyes said everything. And then, as if the moment couldn't wait another second, Rowan leaned in and kissed her, a soft, warm kiss, like the one in the rain so long ago. But this time, it carried the promise of forever. Applause rang out. Sarah dabbed her eyes and Mia lifted her sketch with a proud grin. Lily ran to Hazel, wrapping her arms around her legs and shouting, Aunt Hazel, you look like a princess! Hazel laughed, kneeling to hug her, her heart so full it ached. Not because she was perfectly healed, but because she had learned to love, even with scars. The reception was held right there in the garden, wooden tables draped with linen, string lights glowing overhead, and a small local bakery's chocolate cake adorned with edible flowers. They ate, laughed, and danced beneath the soft glow, even though no one was especially good at dancing. Rowan twirled Hazel in the middle of the garden, nearly stepping on her foot. You're terrible at this, she said, laughing breathlessly. But you're still dancing with me, he replied, pulling her closer, eyes gleaming. As night fell, they sat off to the side, hand in hand, watching their friends laugh and chat. Hazel leaned her head on Rowan's shoulder, feeling the beat of his heart. She thought of that first rainy day, of Finn, of the kiss, of the paintings, the house they'd made a home. She thought of all the days she had been afraid to love, afraid to lose, and how Rowan, with his quiet patience, had taught her how to trust again. Rowan, she whispered, voice soft as the wind. Thank you for not giving up. He turned, kissing her forehead. Thank you for letting me stay. Rain began to fall, just a mist like Portland's way of saying hello. Guests ran under the canopy, but Hazel and Rowan stayed where they were, letting the droplets kiss their skin. They didn't need umbrellas. They had each other. Hazel looked at him, saw that same steady gaze, not promising a life without storms, but a hand to hold through everyone. Later, as they went inside, Sarah handed Hazel a small painting, Mia's surprise gift, a scene of them kissing beneath the linen canopy. Hazel smiled and hung it in their living room, next to the man in the rain. She knew now more than ever, we don't have to be whole to be loved. Sometimes it is love, quiet, patient love, that truly makes us whole. Perched high on a hill overlooking the glittering city lights, the Cross estate stood silent, like a lone sentinel under the September moon. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern design. Sharp lines, polished stone, and floor-to-ceiling glass panels that reflected wealth but offered no warmth. To Luna Bennett, a 22-year-old girl from a dusty small town in the Midwest where cornfields stretched endlessly, it was both a lifeline and a labyrinth. She had arrived 6 months ago, clutching a small suitcase, hoping to build a better future than the one she left behind. Luna was no stranger to hardship. Orphaned at 10, she grew up in an overcrowded foster home, quickly learning that dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford. With her brown hair tied neatly in a ponytail and eyes as clear and as still as a quiet lake, she carried a beauty that needed no display. Her smile was rare, appearing only when she was alone, tending the herb garden behind the servants' quarters or scribbling in a worn journal about a life she barely dared to imagine. a small house with a front porch, a job she loved, and someone who truly saw her. But for now, her reality was the gray apron she wore and the endless duties of a housemaid, polishing silver, scrubbing floors, and staying invisible in the vast halls of Damian Cross's estate. Damian Cross, 34, was the kind of man who seemed to control the world without trying. As the CEO of Cross Enterprises, he had turned the family real estate company into an empire that reshaped city skylines. Tall and broad-shouldered, with jet black hair and striking features, he carried himself like someone who had never known failure. But beneath the tailored suits and confident handshakes was a man scarred by betrayal. His ex-wife, a rising actress, had left him 3 years ago for a rival developer, taking with her half of his faith in people. Since then, Damien lived by one simple rule: everything has a price, and emotions are a liability. He worked late, his office glowing above the hill, a lone figure surrounded by contracts and whiskey. The Cross estate was more than a home. It was a boundary. To Luna, it was survival, a stepping stone to a better future. To Damien, it was a fortress shielding him from a world he no longer trusted. Their paths rarely crossed. Luna moved through the mansion like a shadow, her steps light on the marble floors, while Damien's presence filled the room with a gravity that made her heart race, though she'd never admit it. She knew her place, a girl from nowhere polishing chandeliers for a man who could buy the whole town. But in quiet moments, when she caught him staring out the window, his shoulders heavy with an invisible weight, she wondered if he, too, was searching for something deeper. As the autumn leaves began to fall, scattering reds and golds across the manicured lawns of the estate, Luna stood at the edge of the herb garden, her hands scented with rosemary. She looked up at the glowing mansion in the dusk and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll build something of my own." High above in his office, Damien paused over a stack of papers, his eyes drifting toward the darkening sky. For a fleeting second, he felt a strange ache, a longing for something he had convinced himself he no longer needed. Neither of them knew that fate had already begun to weave their lives together, in ways that would break them, heal them, and change them forever. Autumn drifted gently through the Cross estate, carried on cool breezes tinged with the scent of dry leaves and firewood from the grand hearth in the main hall. Luna Bennett, with her gray apron tightly tied around her waist, moved through the vast corridors like part of the scenery, always present, never noticed. She wiped down the floor-to-ceiling windows, arranged fresh flowers in porcelain vases, and prepared coffee trays for Damian Cross's meetings, all with the care of someone who knew this job was her only ticket out of the past. But in rare quiet moments, while shelving books or sweeping the back courtyard, her heart slipped free from control, wandering to the man she only dared to admire from afar. Damian Cross was not an easy man to approach. He moved through the estate like a powerful gust, swift, decisive, and leaving a trail of tension in his wake. The staff whispered about him, a business genius, a man who tolerated no mistakes, someone who hadn't trusted anyone since his wife walked away. But Luna saw something else. She noticed him in the moments no one else did, like late at night when she cleaned the study and found him sitting at his desk, the dim lamp casting soft shadows on his face. He wasn't reading or working. He was just staring out the window, absently spinning an old Miles Davis CD, the label worn thin. The music played, slow and aching, like it was telling a story he could never put into words. One morning, as Luna left a tray of freshly baked butter cookies on the kitchen counter for the staff, she heard a familiar set of footsteps. Damien walked in, his gray suit perfectly pressed, though his eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept. He stopped, looked at the cookies, and unexpectedly picked one up, taking a small bite. "Who made these?" he asked, voice deep but not harsh. Luna, who had been wiping the counter, startled, nearly dropping her cloth. I did, sir," she replied, eyes lowered to the floor. Damien gave a small nod, said nothing more, but before walking out, he glanced back at her, just a second longer than usual. "They're good," he said, then disappeared through the door. Luna's heart pounded, and she silently scolded herself for letting one tiny compliment rattle her so deeply. Moments like that, fleeting as they were, felt like stones dropped into Luna's still waters. Another time, While she was picking up a stack of scattered documents in the study, Damien walked in, not realizing she was there. He sat down, turned on the familiar jazz track, and murmured something about the old days. When Luna accidentally knocked over a book as she stood up, he looked up, momentarily surprised. "What are you doing here?" he asked, but his tone wasn't angry. "Just cleaning, sir," she said quickly, bending to retrieve the book. He studied her for a beat, then gestured to the CD on his desk. "You like jazz, miss?" He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Luna, sir." "Luna Bennett," she answered, cheeks burning. "And, I haven't heard much jazz." Damien nodded, saying nothing more. But as she left the room, she felt his gaze following her, like he'd just noticed she wasn't merely a shadow in the house. Those small interactions, brief as they were, nurtured something dangerous inside Luna. She began noticing Damien more. The way he ran his hand through his hair when stressed. The way he stood alone on the balcony during rainy nights, his shirt soaked but unfazed. She saw in him a familiar kind of loneliness, the kind she used to feel while lying in her tiny room, staring at the ceiling and wondering if anyone in the world would ever truly need her. But she also knew the line between them. He was Damien Cross, a man who could buy the world, and she was just Luna, an orphan with calloused hands and a journal full of silent dreams. One evening, while tidying up the study, Luna found the jazz CD tucked beneath a stack of papers. She picked it up, her fingers brushing over the faded words. "Kind of blue." She smiled faintly, imagining Damien listening to it in his quietest, most vulnerable moments. Without thinking, she slipped it into the pocket of her apron like a secret token. Later in her small room, she wrote in her journal, "He's not like they say. He's lonely like me. But who am I to think he'd ever see me?" She closed the book, reminding herself that this feeling was a path that led nowhere. Damien Cross lived in a world she could never belong to. But the heart, like the jazz that floated through his office late at night, never obeyed reason. And as autumn deepened, bringing sharper winds and longer shadows, Luna didn't know that those fleeting moments were leading her toward a night that would change everything. Autumn at the Cross estate had turned crisp and cool, the golden glow from the ballroom windows spilling soft light over the misty lawns. That night the mansion dazzled more than ever, hosting an extravagant party for Damien Cross's business partners. Sleek cars lined the circular drive. Laughter mixed with the sound of violins filled the night air. Luna Bennett, dressed in a simple black dress provided for event staff, moved quietly through the crowd. Without her usual gray apron, she looked different, her brown hair loose around her shoulders, her blue eyes catching flashes of chandelier light. But she was still invisible among the wealthy guests. Luna's job was to keep everything flawless. Clear glasses, replace table linens, make sure no one noticed her. She was used to blending into the background, but tonight her heart felt heavier. She had just seen Damien, standing among the guests in a tailored black suit, a rare smile on his lips as he clinked glasses with an investor. He looked dangerously handsome, and Luna hated herself for not being able to look away. She turned back to cleaning a wine stain on the tablecloth when she overheard a nearby man laugh and say to Damien, "You need to loosen up, Cross. I know a place. I'll send someone over tonight." Damien smirked but didn't respond. Still, the comment sent a chill through Luna's chest. When the party ended and the guests trickled out, silence settled over the estate like a curtain. Luna stayed to clean, her footsteps light on the marble floor. She was polishing the last crystal glasses in the kitchen when she heard slow, heavy steps. Damien appeared in the doorway, his jacket gone, 2 buttons undone, dark hair tousled. He leaned against the frame, whiskey glass in hand, eyes glazed with drink. When he looked at Luna, it wasn't the gaze of an employer. It was distant, raw, filled with a hunger that came from somewhere hollow. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough and slurred. "They said someone would come." Luna froze, gripping her cleaning cloth tightly. "Sir, I'm Luna. I'm just cleaning," she said, her voice trembling. She backed away, heart pounding. Damien frowned, as if he hadn't heard. He stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "Don't pretend," he murmured, voice a mix of dominance and pain. "My friend said he'd send someone. What do you want? Money? How much is one night worth? His words cut like glass. Luna backed up until her spine hit the counter, her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Cross, I'm not that kind of woman. I'm just a maid, she said, trying to steady her voice, though her heart was breaking. She wanted to run, to push him away, but his eyes, behind the blur of alcohol, held the same loneliness she'd seen before. When he listened to jazz in his study, when he stood on the balcony in the rain, the same loneliness she carried herself, writing in her journal late at night, wondering if anyone would ever truly need her. Damien stepped closer, the scent of cologne and whiskey overwhelming her. Don't be afraid, he said, voice softer now, almost pleading. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers cold, his eyes burning. I won't hurt you. Luna trembled. Her mind screamed to refuse, to walk away. She knew he was drunk, knew he didn't see her. Not Luna Bennett, just a body to soothe the ache. But her heart, the one that had quietly fallen for him through stolen glances, a compliment about cookies, a question about jazz. It betrayed her. She loved him, even knowing it was hopeless. And in that moment, when he looked at her as if she were everything, she wanted just once to be close to him, to feel love, even if it was an illusion. Luna, Damien whispered, like he was saying her name for the first time. He pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers, urgent, desperate. Luna didn't resist. She closed her eyes and let herself be swept away in her first kiss, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The kiss carried all the love she had hidden, all the heartbreak of a girl who knew this moment would never truly belong to her. Damien led her to the master bedroom, where moonlight filtered through white curtains, painting silver across the bed. He undressed her slowly, possessive yet strangely gentle. Luna shivered beneath each touch, her body torn between fear and yearning. When he whispered her name, she didn't know if he meant her or someone else, but she didn't care. Just once, she wanted to belong to him, even if only in moonlight. When it was over, Luna lay beside him, body aching, heart shattered. Damien had fallen asleep, his face peaceful, just a man, not a cold CEO. She studied him, trying to memorize everything, his face in the moonlight, his steady breathing, the warmth beside her. Her tears came not just for what she had given him, but for knowing the dream would vanish with dawn. Exhausted, she closed her eyes and drifted into sleep beside him, too broken to walk away. Morning came with a pale light seeping through the curtains, waking Luna. She stirred, body sore, heart heavy. Damien was already awake, sitting up in bed, hair tousled, his gray eyes cold as he looked at her. A smirk curved his lips. You're still here, he said, voice low and sharp. Don't think one night in my bed means anything. Luna froze, her heart stopping. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Damien didn't even look at her as he grabbed his phone from the nightstand and scrolled through his messages like she didn't exist. Then, without looking up, he added, How much do you want? Just say it. I don't play these games. His words were a storm, tearing through what little she had left. Her blood turned to ice, each breath a struggle. Last night she had given herself to him, not for money, not for gain, but for love. A love she knew had no future. And now he saw her as a transaction, a cheap exchange. The pain was deeper than anything she had ever known. She didn't cry, not out of strength, but because the pain went beyond tears. Luna quietly rose, slipping back into her crumpled black dress, her hands shaking as she fastened each button. Damien glanced at her, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, but no remorse. I'll leave, she said, voice small but firm. Thank you for everything. She walked out, every step like her world was collapsing beneath her. Damien didn't stop her, just stood there, watching her fragile silhouette disappear through the door. A strange discomfort stirred in him, but he brushed it off. To him, she was just a girl, a passing moment. Luna returned to her small servant's room, sat on the narrow bed, and clutched her pillow as the tears finally fell. The pain of losing her first time mingled with the shame of being seen as someone who sold herself. She couldn't stay, not here, not after this. She picked up a piece of paper and wrote, Dear Mr. Cross, I resign effective today. Thank you for the opportunity. Luna Bennett. She left the letter on the kitchen counter where the housekeeper would find it, then packed her things into her old suitcase. Before leaving the estate, she stood at the gate, looking back at the place that had given her both hope and heartbreak. Her eyes lingered on the window of Damien's room, where a faint light still glowed. "Goodbye, Damien," she whispered. Then she stepped into the early morning fog, unaware that this night hadn't just changed her, but had also set the course for a destiny neither of them could escape. 3 years had passed since Luna Bennett left the Cross Estate. The small town of Willow Creek, nestled beside a lazy river in New England, had become her sanctuary. Cobblestone streets, white-painted wooden houses, and wildflower fields stretching to the horizon offered her a peace she had never known in the city. Here no one knew her past. No one asked about the man she sometimes glimpsed in her son Leo's eyes. Willow Creek was where Luna rebuilt her life, not for herself, but for the 3-year-old boy who had become her entire world. Luna arrived in Willow Creek pregnant, carrying nothing but an old suitcase and a few $100s saved from her time at the estate. Martha, an elderly woman with silver hair and a warm smile, welcomed her into Sweet Haven, the town's cozy bakery on Main Street. "You need a place to start over, don't you?" Martha had said, handing Luna an apron and a job frosting cakes. She also introduced her to a kind landlord who rented Luna a small upstairs apartment in a wooden house, something she could just afford. From there, Luna learned how to knead dough, bake fresh bread, and swirl icing on cupcakes. Each day was a step away from what she had left behind. Leo, Luna's son, was the light in her darkest days. With thick black hair and sparkling gray eyes, he looked so much like Damien Cross that it sometimes startled her. A small teardrop-shaped birthmark behind his ear, visible only when she brushed his hair, was a silent reminder of the father he had never met. But Leo wasn't just Damien's reflection. He had a brilliant smile, endless curiosity, and dreams of becoming an astronaut. "Mom, I'm going to the moon!" he'd shout, waving a plastic stick like a sword, while Luna laughed and pulled him into her arms. When he asked about his dad, she'd smile softly and say, "You have me, and I love you more than the whole universe. That's enough, right?" Leo, in his innocent way, would nod and run off to draw another picture of his astronaut hero. Luna's life in Willow Creek was simple, but not easy. Raising a child alone at 25 was a challenge, especially without any family to lean on. Her bakery wages barely covered rent, food, and Leo's preschool tuition, with little left over. Some nights after Leo had fallen asleep, she'd sit at the small kitchen table, poring over bills beneath a dim light, her heart heavy with worry. But she never complained. Her joy came from the little things: Leo's laughter while they played backyard baseball, the smell of freshly baked cookies, or bedtime stories told under a desk lamp, her voice soft as she described flying dinosaurs and moon adventures. Sweet Haven gave Luna a sense of purpose. She loved the feel of flour on her hands, the way loaves puffed golden in the oven, and the smiles on customers' faces when they praised her apple pie. Martha became like a mother to her, always ready to listen, even if Luna rarely spoke of the past. Only once did she open up, when Martha gently asked about Leo's father. Luna looked out the window, her eyes distant. "He's not a bad man," she whispered, "but he doesn't belong to us." Martha didn't pry. She simply rested a hand on Luna's shoulder, offering silent comfort. Despite building a new life, Luna couldn't fully escape Damien's shadow. Sometimes when Leo tilted his head just so, while throwing a baseball, or when he laughed with that same gleam in his eyes, Damien's image would flash through her mind. The man on the balcony in the rain, who had unknowingly stolen her heart. She wondered if he ever thought of her, even once. But then she would shake the thought away, tucking it deep inside. She was no longer the wide-eyed girl at the Cross Estate. She was Leo's mother, a woman who had learned to stand on her own, even if that strength came solely from the love she had for her child. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek as it dipped behind the distant hills. Sweet Haven Bakery, with its rustic carved wooden sign, exuded the warm scent of butter cookies and fresh apple pie, luring passers-by in like a spell. Behind the counter stood Luna Bennett, now 25, her short brown hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her white apron dusted with flour. 3 years in this town had changed her. No longer the timid maid from the Cross estate, she now carried herself with quiet confidence, though her blue eyes still held a trace of guarded sorrow. She smiled warmly as she wrapped a box of cookies for an elderly customer, but her thoughts were with Leo, her 3-year-old son, who was drawing superheroes in the play corner. The bell over the door jingled, and Luna looked up, ready to greet a new customer. But when the man stepped inside, her smile froze, as if time itself stopped. Damian Cross stood there, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his dark hair slicked back, his sharp gray eyes scanning the bakery like he was assessing a new investment. He was tall, commanding, exactly as she remembered, the man who had once shattered her heart. But there was something different now. Faint lines near his eyes, a weariness in his expression she hadn't seen before. Luna dropped her gaze immediately, pretending to wipe the counter, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the rag. She prayed he wouldn't recognize her, prayed he'd just buy something and leave. Damien hadn't come to Willow Creek looking for Luna. Cross Enterprises was scouting land along the river to build a luxury resort, and he was there to survey a nearby property. Sweet Haven had simply caught his attention, a moment of indulgence drawn in by the smell of butter cookies. He stood at the counter, eyes skimming the trays of pastries, but his attention lingered on Luna. Something about her, the softness in her voice as she greeted another customer, the flicker of blue in her eyes, struck a chord of vague familiarity. But he couldn't place it. 3 years ago, Luna had been just another maid at his estate, a nameless shadow he'd barely noticed. But this woman, with her short hair, flour-covered apron, and steady presence, felt entirely new. "A loaf of barley bread," Damien said, his deep voice firm, eyes still on the display. "Make it quick." Luna nodded, avoiding his gaze. She reached for the loaf with icy hands, wrapped it in brown paper, and forced her voice to stay calm. "Here you go, sir," she murmured, barely above a whisper. She slid the package across the counter, avoiding his eyes, heart pounding so loud she feared he might hear it. Damien took the bag, dropped a few coins on the counter, and turned toward the door. But then a small voice called out from the corner, stopping him in his tracks. "Mommy, I finished my drawing." Leo, in a cozy blue sweater, ran out of the play area, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. He had tousled black hair, sparkling gray eyes, and a beaming smile. "Look, I drew you, me, and a spaceship." Luna knelt and wrapped her arms around him, forcing a smile despite the knot in her chest. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice strained. She could feel Damien's stare from across the room. She rose slowly, shielding Leo behind her as she faced him. Damien stood frozen, a to-go coffee cup forgotten in his hand. He looked at Leo and felt a strange, disorienting sensation, like staring at an old photo of himself as a child. The gray eyes, the lopsided smile. And when Leo turned his head, a small teardrop-shaped birthmark behind his ear peeked out from beneath his hair. Damien's hand instinctively touched the same spot behind his own ear. An identical mark. His heart slammed against his chest. A vague suspicion took root, terrifying in its clarity. He shifted his gaze to Luna, for the first time truly seeing her. The woman from the library, the maid who baked the cookies, who whispered to him about jazz. It was her, Luna Bennett. "Luna," he said hoarsely, barely believing his eyes. Luna straightened, her expression cool and unreadable. There was no trace of the girl who once loved him in silence. "Good afternoon, Mr. Cross," she said, voice flat and distant. "Can I help you with anything else?" Her words were a slap. The way she said Mr. Cross, the wall in her eyes, it left Damien speechless. He wanted to say something, to ask her why she was here, why she had disappeared. But then he looked again at Leo, and his voice failed him. "Leo, go play with Miss Martha for a little bit, okay, honey?" Luna said gently. She handed the boy to Martha, who had just stepped out from the kitchen, then turned back to Damien. "If you're not buying anything else, please leave. I have work to do." Damien stepped closer to the counter, his voice low and urgent. "Luna, we need to talk. I didn't know you were here. I didn't even know—" He stopped himself. His gaze flicked again toward Leo. The possibility rattled him. Luna let out a hollow laugh, sharp and humorless. Talk? She echoed bitterly. You don't remember, Mr. Cross? I was just a mistake from a drunken night. There's nothing left to say. Her words cut him clean. He remembered that night. Whiskey, grief, her eyes as she left. He remembered the cruel things he'd said. And now seeing her here, a woman strong, independent, yet carrying invisible scars. He felt something deeper than regret. His eyes drifted to the child again. That thought, could it be? Don't, Luna said coldly. Don't ask questions you have no right to ask. You had everything you wanted 3 years ago. Now please, leave us alone. Damien wanted to argue, wanted to beg her to stay, but her eyes, so full of hurt, stopped him. He turned, walked out of the bakery, each step heavier than the last. When the door shut behind him, he paused on the sidewalk, looking back through the window. Inside, Luna knelt to hug Leo, her smile warm and full of love. And for the first time in years, Damien felt something he didn't recognize. Fear. Fear that he had missed something precious and might never get it back. Under the gray skies of Willow Creek, Damien Cross sat in a temporary office near the resort development site, the desk lamp casting a stark light across his tense face. The small room, with its plain wooden desk and the lingering scent of stale coffee, was a sharp contrast to his luxurious office back in the city. In front of him lay a thin stack of documents, yet every page felt like a dagger cutting deep into his heart. After the unexpected encounter at Sweet Haven Bakery, Damien had hired a private investigator, swiftly and discreetly, to look into Luna Bennett and the boy named Leo. Now, just 3 days later, the truth was in front of him, clear and undeniable. The report was concise. Luna Bennett, 25 years old, had lived in Willow Creek for 3 years and worked at Sweet Haven Bakery. She lived alone with her son, Leo Bennett, 3 years old, born on August 15th at a small hospital on the outskirts of town. No father's name was listed on the birth certificate, but the detail that made Damien stop breathing was Leo's medical record. Blood type AB negative, a rare type, identical to his own. Then he opened the attached photograph, taken from a distance, showing a teardrop-shaped birthmark behind Leo's ear, exactly like his own. Damien closed the file, his hands trembling, knuckles white. There was no need for a DNA test. Leo was his son. Damien stood and walked to the window, gazing down the road leading to the town center, where the lights of Sweet Haven glowed warmly. Images of Leo, those sparkling gray eyes, the crooked smile, the way he waved his arms while talking about spaceships, filled Damien's mind, vivid like memories from his own childhood. And Luna, the woman he once regarded as invisible, had raised their child alone, without a single complaint, without once seeking him out. That truth hit like a storm, tearing apart the armor he had built around himself, the invincible billionaire who believed everything could be bought. He sat down, buried his face in his hands, and his mind rewound to that night 3 years ago. He remembered the whiskey, a friend's teasing comment about company, and Luna's eyes, frightened yet filled with compassion, when he mistook her for someone else. He remembered the cruel words he'd said the next morning as she quietly left. Don't think one night gives you any right to ask anything from me. He'd thought she didn't matter, just a fleeting moment in a drunken haze. But now her pained expression at the bakery, the strength in her voice when she defended Leo, haunted him like a curse he couldn't escape. One afternoon, Damien returned to Sweet Haven, not for pastries, but to find Martha, the owner. In the back kitchen, surrounded by the scent of flour and vanilla, he asked about Luna, keeping his voice steady though his heart pounded. She's a strong girl, Martha said, pride gleaming in her eyes. Came here with nothing but the clothes on her back, pregnant, and never asked anyone for help. She lives for Leo, and that boy is her whole world. She paused, watching Damien as if she wanted to say more, but only smiled. She deserves to be happy, you know. Martha's words struck him like a blow. Damien left the bakery, walking along the cobbled street, heavy with guilt. He thought of an old keepsake, a kind of Blue Miles Davis CD he once saw Luna holding in the library. Back at the hotel, he rummaged through his suitcase and found it, The label worn, but still carrying memories of nights when he let his true self show. He played the music, letting the melancholic jazz fill the room. And for the first time in years, Damien felt small. He had been wrong. Wrong to treat everything like a transaction, wrong to abandon Luna, and wrong to let his son grow up without a father. In the days that followed, Damien watched Luna and Leo from a distance, unable to approach. He stood outside the bakery in the early mornings, watching her walk Leo to daycare, the boy skipping beside her, clutching a superhero drawing. He saw her smile at her son, a tender smile he had never seen when she worked at his estate. He went to the daycare playground and watched Leo chase his friends, laughter echoing, and each time he saw the boy's face, Damien's heart ached. He wanted to run to him, to hold him, and say, "I'm your father." But he couldn't. Not because he feared Luna's rejection, but because he knew he hadn't earned the right. Damien began to take action, but carefully. He contacted the hospital where Leo was born, using his connections to access old records. The report confirmed Luna had gone into early labor, spent 2 weeks in the hospital due to exhaustion, with no one by her side. The image of her, young, scared, holding their baby in a cold hospital room, made it hard to breathe. He called his assistant and ordered pastries from Sweet Haven for company meetings, a quiet way to support Luna without raising suspicion. He sent a small bicycle for Leo through Martha, saying it was from a loyal customer. Each night, Damien sat in his hotel room, staring at the photograph the investigator had sent. Luna and Leo walking by the river, the boy holding a wildflower smiling up at his mother. Damien wrote a letter of apology, but tore it up after just a few lines. Words weren't enough. He had to prove, through actions, through time, that he was no longer the man who had pushed her out of his life. He looked out the window, the bakery lights glowing like a distant beacon, and whispered, "I won't lose the two of you again." Damien knew his path to redemption had just begun. Luna didn't believe him. The cold look in her eyes made that clear. But he wouldn't give up. Not for Leo, not for Luna, and not for the man he was trying to become, for the first time in his life, a good man. Winter had draped Willow Creek in a soft layer of snow, glistening like powdered sugar under the lanterns of the town's annual winter fair. The cobbled streets of the small New England town transformed into a vibrant painting of handmade stalls, the warm scent of gingerbread, and steaming cups of hot apple cider. Children's laughter mingled with folk music from a local band, creating a cozy atmosphere amid the biting December cold. Luna Bennett, Damien Cross, and little Leo walked into the fair, a scene Luna could not have imagined just weeks ago. In the past few weeks, Damien had slowly built trust. He frequently stopped by Sweet Haven Bakery, placed company orders, chatted with Martha, and found gentle ways to talk to Luna. At first, she responded curtly, but his sincerity gradually softened her guard. He once helped Leo retrieve a runaway baseball and sent him a picture book about astronauts through Martha, prompting Leo to squeal, "Mom, the man from the bakery knew I love space." Despite her caution, Luna saw how much Leo liked Damien, and the man never crossed a line. When Damien suggested they attend the winter fair together, Luna hesitated, but agreed after Martha vouched for him, though she warned, "I'll be close to Leo at all times." At the fair, Leo, bundled in a blue coat, skipped between Luna and Damien, his gray eyes sparkling as he gazed at the glowing lanterns. Luna held his hand tightly, never looking away, while Damien walked beside them, smiling as Leo dragged them toward the ring toss booth. The boy cheered when he won a stuffed bear, then burst into laughter as Damien bought him a cotton candy nearly the size of his face. "Mr. Damien, this is huge!" Leo shouted, sugar on his mouth. Luna stood nearby, hands in her coat pockets, a fleeting smile on her lips at Leo's joy, but her eyes stayed watchful, as if measuring every moment. They stopped at a booth selling hot apple cider. Damien waited in line to buy 3 cups. Leo, standing beside Luna, spotted a colorful ice cream cart a few yards away, its roof decorated with bright balloons. "Mom, I want a balloon," he said, tugging her hand. Luna held his hand firmly and smiled. "We'll get one later, sweetheart." Just then, her phone rang. Martha, urgent on the line. "Luna, the oven at the shop broke. Smoke everywhere. I need you here right now." Luna hesitated, glancing at Leo clutching his bear, eyes full of joy. She wanted to take him with her, but he pouted. I don't want to leave. The fair is so fun. Damien returned with the cider, overhearing the exchange. Luna, I can watch Leo for an hour, he said sincerely. I'll keep him safe, and you can come back once things are under control. Luna shook her head, but Leo tugged her hand, eyes pleading. Mom, I want to stay with Mr. Damien. She looked into her son's eyes, then into Damien's, his gaze unwavering. After a tense pause, she finally nodded, reluctant. 1 hour, she said firmly, and don't let him out of your sight. Luna hurried back to the bakery, heart uneasy but believing Damien would keep Leo safe. Damien held Leo's hand, guiding him through the stalls, trying to keep him entertained to ward off any tension. But when they stopped at a game booth, Damien was approached by a business associate from the resort project. Cross, we need to talk about that land contract, the man said enthusiastically. Damien glanced at Leo, who was tossing balls with a game attendant. He nodded, thinking it would only take a minute. But in the moment Damien turned away, Leo spotted a red balloon drifting through the crowd and chased after it, slipping away from the booth. Leo! Damien shouted when he realized the boy was gone. He tore through the crowd, eyes scanning faces, strangers, other children, but no sign of Leo. The fair's cheerful music became chaotic noise. He asked a vendor, a couple, but no one had seen a boy in a blue coat. His heart pounded, fear gripping him. He called Luna, his voice trembling. Luna! Leo's missing. I'm looking, but please, come now. Back at the bakery, Luna had just fixed the oven when the call came. Hearing Damien's voice, she dropped her tools, face going pale. She sprinted out into the snowy streets toward the fair, panic clawing at her chest. When she arrived, she found Damien in the crowd, hair tousled, eyes wild. Luna, I'm so sorry, he stammered. I looked away for just a minute. She didn't hear him. She ran between booths, shouting Leo's name until her voice went raw. Leo was her entire world. The thought of losing him made it hard to breathe. Finally, she heard soft crying near the parking lot. She dashed toward the sound and saw a drunken man gripping Leo's arm, mumbling, My grandson, where'd you run off to? The man's eyes, glassy from alcohol, had mistaken Leo for his own grandchild. Let go of my son, Luna screamed, charging forward. The man startled and released Leo, stumbling backward. Damien appeared and punched the man hard in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the snow. He scooped Leo up, checking him quickly, then turned the drunk over to fair security. Luna pulled Leo into her arms, holding him tight as tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't say anything, just shook her head, her eyes full of pain as she looked at Damien, as if asking why he didn't keep his promise. Leo sobbed, clinging to his mother. Damien stood frozen, his hand bleeding from a scrape, wanting to explain. But Luna's eyes silenced him. She hugged Leo and walked away, stepping through the snow toward the fair's exit. A local reporter there to cover the fair recognized Damien from articles about the resort project. He'd witnessed the altercation, snapped a photo of Damien with Luna and Leo, and jotted down notes. After that night, Luna became even more distant. She didn't respond when Damien visited the bakery. Her eyes, once cautious, now looked shattered. Damien felt the looming fear of losing her and Leo forever, a pain deeper than any business failure. 10 days later, following town gossip and public records, the reporter published a front-page article in the local paper. CEO Damien Cross has a secret child in Willow Creek? Luna saw the headline on her phone, her heart heavy. She didn't want Leo caught in a media storm. She knew then. She couldn't stay. She packed only what was necessary and left a short note for Martha. Thank you for giving me a home. I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly. Luna? She told no one where she was going, not even Damien. That night, she boarded a bus with Leo asleep on her chest. As the vehicle pulled away from Willow Creek, she looked out the window, silent tears falling. She didn't hate Damien, but she couldn't let his world of power and headlines destroy Leo's peace. Back in his rented house, Damien read the article with empty eyes. The company didn't matter. The headlines didn't matter. He only wanted Luna and Leo. When he went to the bakery and Martha handed him Luna's note, his heart seized. Just a few lines, but they cut deeper than any loss. Thank you for giving me a home. I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly. Luna? Damien gripped the letter, knowing that if he wanted to find them, he had to change. not just with words but with his entire being. He swore to find Luna and Leo, not to force them back, but to prove that he had become the man worthy of them. The first spring rain poured down over Pine Hollow, a small town nestled among the pine forests of New England, soaking the dirt roads and tapping steadily on the wooden roof of the modest cottage Luna Bennett now rented. The little house, with its narrow porch and tiny vegetable garden, had become the place where Luna and Leo began again after leaving Willow Creek. Luna worked at a local cafe, making lattes and baking bread, while Leo adjusted to his new preschool, drawing spaceships on sheets of paper. But despite her efforts to build a new home, Luna couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered in her heart. The article about the billionaire's secret child and the memory of the winter fair, where she almost lost Leo, still haunted her every night. One evening, as heavy rain fell, Luna sat by the window, watching water stream down the glass. Leo was asleep in his room, hugging the stuffed bear from the fair. Her thoughts wandered to Damien, not the cold man who had once hurt her, but the one who had patiently shown up at the bakery, who had punched a drunken man to protect Leo. She wondered if she had left too quickly, if she should have given him a chance to explain, but fear of being hurt again made her shake her head and hold her cooling mug of tea tighter. A sudden knock at the door startled her. With Leo asleep, she rose, threw on a sweater, and opened the door. Damien Cross stood there, drenched in the downpour, his white shirt clinging to his body, black hair plastered to his forehead. His gray eyes burned with a determination she had never seen before. He held no umbrella, rain pouring down his face, but he stood still as if the cold meant nothing. "Luna," he said, voice hoarse but steady, "I need to talk. Just 5 minutes." Luna froze, heart pounding. She wanted to shut the door, to push him out of her life again, but his eyes, sincere and almost pleading, made her hesitate. She crossed her arms, her voice icy. "Mr. Cross, how did you find me? And what do you want now?" Damien stepped onto the porch, letting the rain soak him, making no move to intrude on her space. "I hired someone to find you," he admitted plainly, "but I'm not here to force anything. I'm here to apologize, to beg for your forgiveness." Luna shook her head, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, though she held them back. "Apologies don't change anything, Damien. You had your chance 3 years ago, and you chose to hurt me." Damien lowered his head, fists clenched at his sides, rain dripping from his hair onto the wooden floor. "I know," he said, voice deep and pained. "I was wrong to think everything could be bought. Love, trust, even people. I was wrong not to see your worth, to walk away from you and Leo. Since the day you left the estate, I've felt like I've been walking through life without truly living. And when I learned about Leo, I realized I'd lost the most precious thing I ever had." He looked up, eyes locking with hers. "I don't want to drag you into my world, Luna. I want to be part of yours. Taking Leo to preschool, sitting with you in this house, listening to you talk about your cafe shifts. I want to be the man who knows how to love, not the billionaire you once knew." His words were like spring wind, slipping through the walls Luna had built around her heart. She looked at him, soaked, shivering from the cold, yet steady in his gaze. He didn't kneel, didn't make grand promises, just stood there with a sincerity that cut deep. She remembered how he played with Leo, how he dove into the crowd to find him at the fair, and the pain in his eyes when she left Willow Creek. "Damien," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm scared. Scared you'll hurt me again. Scared for Leo." Damien stepped closer but stopped a step short, respecting her space. "I swear, Luna," he said softly but firmly, "I will never hurt you or Leo again. Give me a chance, not to fix the past, but to prove I can be the man you need." She looked into his eyes and saw the truth she had longed for 3 years ago. Her tears finally fell, blending with the rain. She stepped onto the porch, letting it soak her sweater, and stood before him. "Okay," she whispered, voice soft but resolute, "but if you hurt me or Leo again, I'll never forgive you." Damien smiled, the first real smile Luna had ever seen from him, not the polished smile of a CEO, but of a man who'd found hope. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder as if afraid she might vanish. "Thank you, Luna," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. She nodded, allowing him to pull her into a gentle embrace as rain poured around them, washing away old pain. Luna led Damien inside, handing him a towel to dry off. Leo still slept soundly, unaware his parents had just found their way back to each other. Damien sat at the kitchen table, taking in the modest home with reverent eyes. "I'm staying in Pine Hollow," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm worthy of you and Leo." Luna looked at him, a small smile blooming, one that, for the first time, wasn't touched by sorrow. "Then start now, Damien," she said. "Be the man I can believe in." That night, they sat at the kitchen table, talking about small things. Leo, the cafe, the rainy days in Pine Hollow. Beneath the warm light, Luna felt a flicker of hope that maybe this time she had placed her trust in the right person. Spring in Pine Hollow arrived with gentle breezes that swept through the pine forests and rustled the wildflowers in the small garden behind Luna Bennett's wooden cottage. The house, with its narrow porch and floral curtains, was no longer just a shelter for Luna and Leo. It had become a place where Damien Cross was learning how to be part of a family. Ever since that rainy night when Luna gave him a second chance, Damien had rented a small apartment just a few blocks from the cafe where Luna worked, determined to prove he was no longer the cold man who once hurt her. Every morning, Luna and Damien worked side by side at Pine Brew Cafe, a cozy space filled with wooden tables and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. Luna, wearing a green apron, made lattes and baked bread, while Damien, once accustomed to luxury boardrooms, learned to operate the espresso machine and take customer orders. He was clumsy, spilling milk, mixing up names, but every time Luna laughed and wiped coffee off his hand, he felt closer to her world. "You're a CEO and still can't beat this machine?" she teased, eyes sparkling. Damien grinned and kissed her forehead. "Because now, all I want is to do things right, for you and Leo." In the afternoons, they picked up Leo from preschool together. The nearly 4-year-old boy would run to the gate, shouting joyfully at the sight of his mom and Mr. Damien. Damien often carried Leo on his shoulders, letting him point out birds in the sky, while Luna held Damien's hand and shared funny customer stories from the cafe. At home, they cooked dinner together, usually Leo's favorite spaghetti, and spent the evenings building block towers or drawing. Leo, with his wild imagination, once drew the three of them on a spaceship, making Luna and Damien exchange warm, knowing glances. But their journey wasn't without struggles. Luna still had days of doubt when memories of the Cross estate resurfaced. One night, after Leo had gone to sleep, she sat on the porch watching the soft drizzle and asked Damien, "Are you sure, Damien? This life, small house, cafe shifts, no mansion or power, is enough for you?" Damien sat beside her, took her hand gently. "Luna, I once had everything, and I was never truly happy. You and Leo, you're my whole world now." She looked into his eyes, saw sincerity, but she still needed time to fully believe it. Damien also had to learn how to be a father. Though Leo adored him, the boy sometimes asked questions that caught him off guard. "Mr. Damien, why didn't you live with me and Mommy before?" Leo asked once, clutching a wooden block. After a pause, Damien replied, "I got lost, Leo, but now I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He taught Leo how to throw a baseball in the backyard, patiently showing him each movement. When Leo finally hit the target, he ran into Damien's arms, shouting, "Mr. Damien, I did it!" Damien, eyes stinging, held him tight, feeling for the first time what it meant to be a father. To show his transformation, Damien started with the practical. He helped Luna fix the garden fence, repaint the porch, and even tried baking with her, though he usually ended up covered in flour. He turned down a major Cross Enterprises deal to stay in Pine Hollow, delegating control to his city team. Inspired by Luna's journey, he also launched a small charity project, Haven of Hope, to support single mothers and orphans. "I don't want anyone to feel as alone as you once did," he told her. And for the first time, Luna hugged him without hesitation. Their greatest test came when Leo caught a cold and ran a high fever through the night. Luna and Damien stayed up, taking turns checking his temperature and placing cool cloths on his forehead. When Leo finally woke, weak but smiling, calling for Mommy and Mr. Damien, Luna looked at Damien and saw the worry and love in his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, for the first time using his name without a barrier. Damien kissed the top of her head, relief washing over him. One spring afternoon, Damien organized a small picnic in the backyard with Luna's homemade bread and fresh apple juice. Leo ran through the garden chasing butterflies while Luna and Damien sat on a blanket, watching him. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Luna asked softly. Damien took her hand, his gaze steady. "We'll be okay, Luna, because we have each other." That night, after Leo fell asleep, Luna and Damien sat on the porch, gazing at the stars shining through the pines. She leaned on his shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in years. "I used to think I'd never trust anyone again," she said. "But you're changing that." Damien smiled, pulling her closer. "And I won't stop trying, Luna. Not as long as it's for you and Leo." Under the starlight, they both knew their family wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on simple things: spaghetti dinners, baseball throws, and embraces in the rain. The kind of moments that made up true happiness. Summer arrived in Pine Hollow, bathing the small New England town in a soft golden light that made the pine forest glisten and the garden behind Luna Bennett's wooden cottage bloom with wildflowers. The house, with its freshly painted porch and floral curtains, had become the heart of a growing family. Luna, Damien Cross, and nearly 4-year-old Leo had found their own rhythm. Mornings brewing coffee, afternoons tossing baseballs, and evenings filled with bedtime stories under warm lights. After months of Damien patiently proving his love, Luna finally felt her heart open, no longer trapped by the fear of her past. One June afternoon, with sunlight filtering through the pine branches, Damien led Luna and Leo into the backyard, saying he had a surprise. Leo, brandishing a plastic stick like a space sword, squealed with delight when he saw the far corner of the garden, decorated with paper lanterns and a blanket spread out on the grass, topped with Luna's homemade bread and apple cider. Luna smiled, thinking it was just a family picnic, until Damien dropped to one knee, and her heart skipped a beat. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a silver ring engraved with daisies, simple yet elegant, like the flowers she loved in her garden. "Luna," he said, his voice steady and deep, "you gave me a chance to make things right. I can't promise you the whole world, but I promise to spend my life loving and protecting you and Leo. Will you marry me?" Luna covered her mouth, eyes shimmering with tears. Leo, standing beside them, jumped up and shouted, "Mom, marry Mr. Damien. I want him to be my dad." Luna laughed through her tears, knelt before Damien, and embraced him. "Yes, Damien," she whispered, "I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her softly as Leo dove between them, knocking all three onto the blanket in a burst of laughter under the golden light. The wedding took place a few weeks later, right there in the backyard. It wasn't extravagant, just a few close friends, Martha from Willow Creek, co-workers from Pine Brew, and neighbors from Pine Hollow. But it overflowed with love. Luna wore a simple white dress that fell to her ankles, her brown hair loose with a crown of daisies. Damien, in a light gray suit, stood beneath a wooden arch he had built himself, eyes never leaving her. Leo, in a tiny vest, proudly tossed rose petals from a basket, grinning as he shouted, "Mom married Dad!" They exchanged vows under the setting sun. Luna, her voice trembling with emotion, said, "Damien, you gave me a family. I promise to stand by you through everything." Damien took her hands, eyes sincere. "Luna, you are my light. I promise to love and cherish you every day of my life." They exchanged silver rings and kissed under the golden sky, surrounded by applause and laughter. The reception was simple but warm. Cupcakes baked by Luna and Damien, apple cider in mason jars, and soft violin music from a neighbor. Leo ran through the garden with his friends, laughter echoing in the air. Damien never let go of Luna's hand, pulling her into a slow dance on the grass and whispering, "Thank you for giving me a home." Luna leaned into his chest, smiling. "Thank you for becoming mine." That night, Damien carried a sleepy Leo back inside, while Luna walked beside him. They stood by Leo's bed, watching him sleep under the soft glow of the lamp, the stuffed bear from the fair still clutched in his arms. Damien wrapped his arms around Luna from behind and whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy." She turned to him, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "Neither did I, Damien." In the months that followed, they embraced their simple life. Luna opened a small bakery, Pine Blossom, right beside the cafe, selling cookies and apple pies. Damien painted walls and hauled flour, always close by. He continued his work with Haven of Hope, supporting single mothers and orphans, often bringing Luna and Leo to events so they could see the heart behind his work. Leo, now calling Damien Dad, started asking about camping trips and the puppy he'd always dreamed of. Under the summer moonlight, Luna and Damien sat on the porch, gazing at the stars through the pine canopy. They talked about the future, not grand dreams, but simple things: a beach trip, a bigger garden, and maybe someday a sibling for Leo. "We don't need everything," Luna said, her hand laced in his. "Just the right people." Damien smiled, pulling her into his arms. "And I've already found mine." Beneath the pine hollow stars, they knew their happiness didn't come from perfection, but from the little things. Leo's laughter, embraces in the kitchen, and a love that had weathered pain to finally find its home. It was real, and they would cherish it, one day at a time. Do you believe in love overcoming pain like Luna and Damien? Comment below and follow the channel to see more inspiring stories like this.